Hey everyone, this is Theo from Headphones.com, and today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on the iBasso DX300. This is the company's latest DAP, and it clocks in at roughly $1,250. I have actually been looking for an upgrade for some time now to my trusty DX160, and the DX300 was just the most natural point of progression. So yeah, I actually bought this with my own money from Headphones.com, and as always, what follows are my honest thoughts and opinions to the best of my ability. Let's take a look. Okay, let's take a look at the DX300 itself, and this is a very beefy DAP. It clocks in at, I want to say, 162 millimeters by 77 millimeters by 17 millimeters and 300 grams. So for reference, that's basically my iPhone X stacked twice over and with a larger screen to boot. Luckily, there's some added benefits here, one of which is, of course, the screen. This is a very, very awesome screen. It has a higher screen to body ratio than even a lot of smartphones that I've seen. And I believe it's 2340 by 10180 pixels with 297 dpi. So just a terrific screen in general, and it's a real pleasure to look at album artwork on this DAP in particular. At the top of the screen here, you also have an LED strip which will turn on when music is playing or when the DAP is charging. Other hardware features include, on the right side of the DAP, you have this gold volume wheel. It has a pretty pleasant tactile feedback, and you also have little ridges here to catch your finger. Over here, you also have your volume buttons. They are rectangular and they sit fairly flush to the DAP. I don't know if I'm a big fan of this. I think I would have liked circular buttons, but they work, although they don't work very nicely with the case. Over here, you have a micro SD card slot, and the DX300 comes with 128 gigabytes on board storage, so that's pretty sweet as well. On the bottom, you have your AMP11 Mark II module, so that has a 4.4 millimeter, a 2.5 millimeter, and then a 3.5 millimeter. So you're pretty much covered in all the basic terminations. At top, here we have a USB-C charging port, and then you have a coaxial port as well. And then on the back, you can see that there's this very nice finish to it. It almost reminds me of the Apple MacBook finishes, and they said they use glass, but I'm not too sure about that. Either way, very classy, very nice DAP in general, and it definitely inspires a sense of confidence in the hand. So under the hood, you also have some interesting stuff going on. The DX300 sports an 8-core Qualcomm Snapdragon 660 with 6 gigabytes of RAM. While this is fairly middling for a smartphone chip nowadays, for a DAP, this is big news. And as a result, the DX300 is probably one of the snappiest DAPs that I've played with. There is almost zero lag, and it's just a real treat to use in practice. I was able to run a variety of applications like YouTube, Google Drive, Discord. All of them ran without pretty much any issue, so that's pretty darn sweet if you ask me. And when we're speaking of DAPs, this goes a long way in my book. Another interesting thing to point out is that the DX300 makes use of two separate batteries. There's a 4000 mAh one for the digital side, and then there's a 2000 mAh battery for analog tasks. In layman's terms, which is basically the extent of which I am personally able to understand it, the idea here is that separate battery types, they eliminate unwanted distortion that may occur with a single battery, and especially when the battery is under duress. Whether this has tangible benefits in practice, I honestly could not tell you, but I guess it's a nice touch, and I do see this on some higher end DAPs in general. For battery life, it was generally good in my experience, and I'd imagine it would hold up well for a workday's use. I think I would still recommend picking up a fast charger for the DX300 though, as it does require a considerable amount of power to charge quickly. Okay, so now I'm going to give you guys a quick walkthrough through the stock Mango app. If you guys are wondering, the DX300 actually has two separate OSs. The Mango OS is not particularly useful if you ask me, and I actually found it to run slower than the Android OS, which sort of leads me to surmise that it hasn't been optimized very well. That said, I am perfectly happy with the stock Mango app, which I'm going to be talking about now. So the stock Mango app, it has pretty much all of the basic things you might want, like shuffle, loop, and just list mode. Here are the playlists. You can import them from your computer using MP3U, or you can generate them from the DX300 itself. Over here, you can access the internal SD card, and this is where an external SD card will also show up if you want to import music that way. If we go to the settings, you also have access to a bunch of other stuff. Here are the gain levels, the play mode, and then I think the biggest selling point actually is going to be this equalizer here. So you have a graphic equalizer with 10 bands, And then over here you have a parametric equalizer with up to 6 settings. A final nice touch about the Mango app is that it'll showcase the album artwork of the track currently being played at full size on the unlock screen. This is pretty sweet, and you can certainly disable this, but I don't know why you would want to. It just looks awesome. Now, all that out of the way, I will say there are still some small bugs in the system. This is pretty normal for any DAP. Again, these are niche products and all that, and thankfully iBasso tends to be one of the better manufacturers when it comes to aftermarket support. And here I'll show you the most noticeable issue for me. It happens when I turn off the DAP and my finger is touching the screen. And it just turns on like nothing happened. You can see I didn't press the button and it just resets itself. Before we get into the sound talk, as a quick disclaimer, the differences that I hear between DAPs in terms of sound are not as major as I think some people might like to think they are. Or at least that has been my experience thus far. For my listening, I used my U12T, my Blessing 2, and the Andromeda 2020. Speaking of the Andromeda 2020, the DX300 is probably not going to be the best pairing with more sensitive IMs. It hissed quite a bit, and the Android 2020, which already has a more laid-back signature in general, quite warm signature, I just felt that it wasn't the best pairing. It sounded a little bit more mushy than I'd like, and a little bit too, I guess, congested in general. For other power considerations, I had no issues running the DX300 with headphones like the 800S, the Clear, and the Hi-Fi Man Sudara. All of them ran fine with it. I don't even think I had to use high gain most of the time. The DX300 has a south of neutral, more warm, more organic presentation in general. The bass on this has a slight mid-bass emphasis to my ears, but the sheer slam and the texture are just super satisfying. In fact, I want to say this is the best DAP that I've heard for bass thus far. The mid-range, again, it is a thicker mid-range in general with a more smooth presentation to it. I do hear a slight blunting of transient attack actually, and I say this in the most pleasant sense possible, which is sort of lending to this perception. Of course, the trade-off is that the DX300 could just be that smidge more resolving than it is, in the mid-range specifically. Moving to the treble, I want to say again, it's fairly smooth. There does appear to be a little bit of maybe glare in the mid-treble. That's sort of a characteristic of a lot of, I don't want to say chi-fi DAPs, but DAPs that use these chips in general. It is by far from being the worst that I've heard in this respect, and the tonality overall here is a dead ringer for my preferences in general. Moving into technicalities, what immediately stood out to me about the DX300 was its macrodynamics. The DX300 has really good macrodynamic punch, and the perception of this is aided by that very meaty and rotund bass that I was just talking about earlier. Contrast itself is also quite good, so dynamic contrast in this respect when a sort of DAP is able to scale decibel gradations. For other stuff like soundstage and imaging, this is a very open presentation for a DAP in my opinion. The biggest issue that I would probably point out is a lack of center image incision. I sort of struggle to pinpoint where vocals are coming from positionally on the soundstage, although there is the feeling of a good amount of depth to the sound. What else is there to talk about? Oh yeah, detail retrieval. Detail retrieval in general is pretty much what I would expect for the price, that is to say excellent. This is a very resolving DAP, and I really do like the balance that iBasso has struck here between that sort of, I don't want to say it's a lifelike presentation, but it is a very smooth and natural presentation in general, and maintains a high degree of technical competency. As for sound adjustments, the Mango app has 5 built-in filters, which I will talk about now. And I'm just going to read it off of my notes actually, because I can't remember what each one does specifically. So D1 fast roll-off has the slowest attack and the most distant presentation. D3 short delay fast roll-off had the sharpest, thinnest sound to my ears, which I was not a fan of. D2 short delay slow roll-off and D4 slow roll-off, they sort of fell in between the D1 and D3 filters. I believe the D4 filter sounded slightly smoother than the D2 filter, but honestly it could have been the other way around. And in this vein, the differences between these filters are honestly so small that I don't think it makes a big difference. The 5th filter though, the NOS filter, was the one that made the most audible difference to my ears. It had more of an analog presentation, but I also wasn't a big fan of it because it sounded like it was sort of smothering the timbre under a blanket. Alright, let's talk conclusions. The DX300 surprised me, but I think it was for mostly the right reasons. It combines class-leading hardware for DAP with excellent sound quality and a sort of smooth, natural sound signature that I think most would be hard-pressed to find fault with. I think the biggest consideration to take into account is going to be the size of this DAP. But for listeners who are okay with sacrificing a significant chunk of pocket real estate, the DX300 is going to be a solid recommendation from me. And yeah, I think that's going to do it for this review. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.